Hi everyone and welcome back to George's Marvellous Medicine. It's our last chapter today, chapter 15, Goodbye Grandma. You can see what's going to be happening in this one. Right then. There's still something you've left out, Mr. Cranky said. I can't think what it could be, George said. Give it up, Mrs. Cranky said. Pack it in, you're never going to get it right. Mr. Cranky looked very forlorn. George looked pretty fed up too. He was still kneeling on the ground with a spoon in one hand and a cup of medicine in the other. The ridiculous tiny brown hen was walking slowly away. At that point, Grandma came striding onto the yard. Her enormous height. She glared down at the three people below and shouted, "What's going on around here? Why hasn't anyone brought me my morning cup of tea? It's bad enough having to sleep in the yard with the rats and mice, but I'll be blowed if I'm going to be starved as well. No tea, no eggs, no bacon, no buttered toast." "Sorry, Mother," Mrs. Cranky said. "You've been terribly busy. I'll get you something right away." "Let George get it, the lazy little brute," Grandma shouted. Just then the old woman spotted a cup in George's hand. She bent down and peered into it. She saw that it was full of brown liquid, and it looked very much like a cup of tea. "Oh," she cried, "so that's your little game, is it? You look after yourself all right, don't you? You make sure that you've got a nice cup of tea. But don't think to bring your poor old grandma some. I always knew you were a selfish little pig." "No, Grandma," George said. "This isn't—" "Don't lie to me, boy," the enormous old hag shouted. "Pass it up here in this minute." "No," cried Mrs. Cranky. "No, Mother, don't do it. It's not for you." "Now you're against me too," she shouted. "Grandma, shouted Grandma. "My own daughter, trying to stop me having my breakfast, trying to starve me out." Mr. Cranky looked at the horrid old woman and smiled sweetly. "Of course it's for you, Grandma," he said. "You take it and you drink it whilst it's nice and hot." "Don't think I won't," Grandma said, bending down from a great height and reaching out with a huge, horny hand for the cup. "Hand it over, George." "No, no, Grandma," George cried out. "You're pulling the cup away. You mustn't have it." "Give it to me, boy," yelled Grandma. "Don't," cried Mrs. Cranky. "That's George's Marvellous." "Everything's George's round here," shouted Grandma. "George is this and George is that. I'm fed up with it." She snatched the cup out of George's hand and carried it up out of reach. "Drink it up, Grandma," Mr. Cranky said, grinning hugely. "Lovely tea." "No," the other two cried. "No, no, no," but it was too late. The ancient beanpole had already put the cup to her lips, and in one gulp she swallowed everything that was in it. "Mother," wailed Mrs. Cranky, "you've just drunk 50 doses of George's Marvellous Medicine number 4, and look what one tiny dose did to that little brown hen." But Grandma, she didn't hear her. Great clouds of steam were already pouring out of her mouth, and she was beginning to whistle. "This is going to be interesting," Mr. Cranky said, grinning. "Now you've done it," cried Mrs. Cranky, glaring at her husband. "You've cooked the old girl's goose." "I didn't do anything," Mr. Cranky said. "Oh, yes, you did. You told her to drink it." A tremendous hissing sound was coming from above their heads. Steam was shooting out of Grandma's mouth, nose, and ears, and then the whistling came. "She'll feel better after she's had a bit of that. A little bit of steam let off," Mr. Cranky said. "She's going to blow up," Mrs. Cranky wailed. "The boiler's going to burst." "Stand clear," Mr. Cranky said. George was quite alarmed. He stood up and ran back a few paces. The jets of white steam kept squirting out of the skinny old hag's head, and the whistling was so high and shrill that it hurt his ears. "Call the fire brigade!" cried Mrs. Cranky. "Call the police! Man the hose pipes!" "Too late," said Mr. Cranky, looking pleased. "Grandma!" shrieked Mrs. Cranky. "Mother! Go to the drinking trough and put your head under the water." But even as she spoke, the whistling suddenly stopped and the steam disappeared. That was when Grandma started to get smaller. She started off with her head as high as the roof of the house, but now she was coming down fast. "What's this, George?" Mr. Cranky shouted, hopping around the yard, flapping his arms. "Watch what happens when someone's had 50 spoonfuls. Not one, 50. Very soon Grandma was back to normal height. "Stop!" cried Mrs. Cranky. "That's just about right." But she didn't stop. Smaller and smaller she got. Down and down she went. In another half minute she was no bigger than a bottle of lemonade. "How do you feel, Mother?" asked Mrs. Cranky anxiously. Grandma's tiny face bore the same foul and furious expression that she always had. Her eyes, now no bigger than little keyholes, were blazing with anger. "How do I feel?" she yelled. "How do you think I feel? How would you feel if you'd been an enormous giant a minute ago, and then suddenly you're a miserable midget?" "She's still growing," shouted Mr. Cranky gleefully. "She's still getting smaller." And she was. She was no bigger than a cigarette. Mrs. Cranky made a grab for her. She held her in her hand and cried, "How do I stop her getting smaller still?" "You can't," said Mr. Cranky. "She's had 50 times the right amount. I must stop her, Mrs. Cranky wailed. I can hardly see her as it is. Catch hold of each end and pull, Mr. Cranky said. By then, Grandma was the size of a matchstick and shrinking fast. A moment later, she was no bigger than a pin, then a pumpkin seed, then. Where is she? Cried Mrs. Cranky. I've lost her. Hooray! Said Mr. Cranky. She's gone. She's disappeared completely, cried Mrs. Cranky. That's what happens when you're grumpy and bad-tempered, said Mr. Cranky. Great medicine of yours, George. George didn't really know what to think. For a few minutes, Mrs. Cranky kept wandering around with a puzzled look on her face, saying, Mother, where are you? Where have you gone? Where have you got to? How can I find you? But she calmed down quite quickly by lunchtime, she was saying. Oh, well, I suppose it's for the best, really. She was a bit of a nuisance around the house, wasn't she? It's a bit harsh. Yes, Mr. Cranky said. She most certainly was. George didn't say a word. He felt quite trembly. He knew something tremendous had just taken place that morning. For a few brief moments, he had touched with the very tips of his fingers the edge of a magic world. The end. Guys, it has been an absolute pleasure to read George's Marvellous Medicine with you. Tune in tomorrow for the next book. See you later. Bye.